When he heard the scrape at the door, his vision blurred, because he realized it was not the wind. The storm raged outside the tiny wooden cabin, its walls creaking under the weight of ice and howling gusts. Snow whipped across the clearing, reducing the world to a riot of white. Inside, the old hunter sat hunched by a dim lamp, a cup of bitter tea warming his gnarled hands. He had lived here for decades, a solitary figure in the heart of the taiga. The loneliness was familiar, the cold was a constant companion. At first, he thought the noise had been a branch knocking against the doorframe. Cabin doors groaned in these woods. But the sound came again, low, deliberate, as if something heavy was testing its way in. He set his cup down, every muscle tensing. His heart hammered, each beat echoing in his ears. It felt ordinary at first, like the usual creaks of an old house settling, until he realized it was anything but. Instinct pushed him to his feet. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall, fingers trembling around the worn wood. A lifetime of hunting had taught him fear and respect in equal measure, but this was different, a primal dread settled in his chest. Each step toward the door felt weighted, as though he carried the weight of every winter he had endured. He yanked the door open, and everything went still. There, standing in the swirling snow, was a massive bear, a she-bear, her coat frosted and matted. In her jaws she held a cub, its small body limp, half hidden by her powerful teeth. The bear did not roar. She did not raise her hackles or snarl. She simply stood there, unblinking, her dark eyes meeting his. She looked at him, as if she knew him. For a heartbeat, the hunter's mind went blank. He felt the world tilt and spin. He could hardly believe the scene before him, a wild creature, mother to the core, offering her most vulnerable offspring at his threshold. The wind howled behind her, but her gaze was silent thunder. He should have raised his rifle. He should have driven her away, sent her stumbling back into the storm. But the weapon felt impossible to lift, as though some unseen force held it in place. He couldn't scare her off. He couldn't shoo her away like a stray dog. Instead, he stood frozen, rain of snow swirling at his boots, tears stinging his eyes from the biting cold. As the seconds stretched, the bear's eyes never wavered. His chest tightened with a mixture of awe and terror. His breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel the rough wood of the doorframe digging into his palm, anchoring him in this impossible moment. She did not growl. She did not sniff the air. She simply lowered her head slightly, as though to say, "Do you see me? Do you feel this?" The cub in her jaws shivered. Its tiny limbs hung limp. The bear's powerful shoulders rose and fell gently with each breath, but she offered no more. It was his choice now, to act, to remain, to turn away. He felt a fierce protectiveness flare inside him, mingled with guilt for the rifles he had carried all these years, the lives he had taken, the balance he had upset. He could not move. He wanted to chase her away. But he couldn't. Something in her gaze pierced him to the core. In his mind's eye, he saw all the winters he had known, the tracks he had followed, the animals he had wounded and left behind. And now, here was this mother, bringing her child to him, her greatest enemy, seeking something he could not name. Mercy? Aid? Or simply acknowledgement? He took a step back, recognizing that his cabin had become a crossroads of fate. The lamp flickered, and for a moment the woman's cold breath hung visible between them, swirling like smoke. She lowered her head further, proffering the cub as though presenting a gift, a plea. He swallowed hard, his throat constricting. He felt an awakening deep in his bones, humility. The wind shrieked around them. He thought he heard a soft whimper from the cub. His rifle lay forgotten inside, its barrel pointing uselessly at the snow. The bear's eyes burned with an ancient wisdom he could not articulate, something both sorrowful and hopeful. He was the hunter, yet she stood before him in perfect calm, mother to mother, heart to heart. He opened his mouth, words lodged like ice. Finally, he managed a whisper, "You brought her to me." The bear's gaze held steady. Then, with a gentle grunt, she released the cub into the snowdrift at his feet and backed away, never taking her eyes off him. It was as if she trusted him to do the right thing. He wanted to drop to his knees, to cradle the cub in his arms. He wanted to apologize, to every being he had ever harmed. Yet he simply stood there, tears freezing on his lashes. The storm thundered. The bear turned and lumbered back into the white oblivion, cub at her side. He watched until they disappeared, until the swirling veil of snow swallowed them whole. Then he closed the door, his world irrevocably changed. He leaned against the wooden plank, heart pounding, breath trembling in his chest. He had been ready to fight, to defend his home, and instead, he had witnessed something far greater, a testament of trust, a moment of pure, unspoken grace. He did not know what would come next. But he knew, without a doubt, that he would never be the same. He watched, heart pounding, as the great bear settled on the wooden threshold like a colossal, solemn dog. The cub lay between her massive paws, its tiny chest rising and falling in ragged, desperate gasps. A thin mist of breath curled from its muzzle, and each shuddering exhale was a silent plea. The wind slashed at the cabin, but she paid it no heed, her attention fixed on the crumpled shape of her child. Fear knotted in his gut. Every nerve in his body screamed to slam the door shut, to arm himself, to banish this intruder. Yet he remained rooted, rifle forgotten in the corner, mind whirling. The bear's dark eyes, rimmed with frost, never left his. In them was no anger, only an ancient sorrow and a fragile trust that cut deeper than any blade. At last, he found his voice, low and trembling. "Stay there," he whispered, as much to himself as to her. He stepped onto the porch, each footfall heavy with uncertainty. The storm's howl faded to a distant roar as he moved closer, drawn by compassion he could not explain. The bear shifted, rising on her haunches, then backed away a few careful paces, never breaking eye contact. She seemed to understand, this was his domain, and she would not overstep its bounds. He crouched beside the cub, careful not to startle it further. Frost had turned its fur stiff and white around the muzzle. A deep gash ran along one flank, matted with blood and ice. The little creature whimpered, a broken sound that shattered the remnant of his stoicism. He pressed a gloved hand to its flanks, feeling life ebb beneath the brittle fur. She remained motionless, a silent sentinel. He realized then, she had brought him this burden, laid it in his hands across the threshold of her world and his own. A thought flickered in his mind, she knew he would help. There was nothing he could do here in the open. The wind would kill it as surely as the wound. With effort, he scooped the cub into his arms. It weighed little, but even that slight weight threatened to crush broken bones. He stood, supporting its frail body, and stepped inside the cabin. The bear didn't follow, she watched through the gap, her silhouette outlined in the swirling flakes. He crossed the room, fumbling in the gloom for a woolen blanket. The cub's breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle. He laid it gently on the rug before the hearth, then piled blankets over it, praying that warmth might slow the cold's ruthless claim. He fetched water in his enamel mug, heated it over the fire, and wetted a cloth, pressing it to the wound to thaw the ice and soothe the torn flesh. All the while, he felt the weight of her gaze at the door. He dared not look, he could not bear the intensity of that silent appeal. She had entrusted him with her child. His chest tightened with a pang of guilt, his life had been one of bullets and traps, of tracking and taking. Yet here was a mother who refused to abandon her own, placing faith in the hands that had once brought her harm. He moved methodically, tearing strips of cloth to bind the wound, whispering soothing words to the cub, as though each syllable could breathe strength back into its tiny lungs. He repositioned the blankets, propping it gently so it could press against the steady warmth of the stove. Its whiskered face twitched. For an instant, he thought it might open its eyes, but then the frailty of life reasserted itself, and it sank back into unconsciousness. Exhaustion washed over him, but he forced himself to continue. He ladled water into a shallow dish and placed it within reach of the cub's quivering snout. He rubbed his hands on his coat to warm them, then stroked the matted fur, murmuring, "Hold on, little one. Hold on." In that moment, he understood the depth of a mother's love, raw and unyielding, a force of nature as fierce as any blizzard. Behind him, a soft scrape drew his attention. He turned to see the bear at the door once more. She sat patiently, head bowed, as if offering vigil. The ember glow from the hearth played across her heavy shoulders, and for a fleeting second, her eyes glistened, as though she offered thanks. He swallowed hard, voice thick. "I will do my best," he said, though the words felt foolish in the hush. She inclined her head in response, then settled down once more, waiting. He knelt beside her cub, pressing his cheek against the blankets. "I thought," he whispered to himself, "that she brought him to me, as if she knew I would help." Tears stung his eyes, not from the cold but from the weight of what had unfolded, a creature of the wild, risking everything to place her hope in a stranger. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, an unspoken covenant had formed. In that fierce silence, the hunter realized that mercy, once given, could bridge the chasm between man and beast. And as he tended to the fragile life at his feet, he understood that this night would change him forever. He sat by the fading embers, the cub's shallow breaths echoing in the silence. Each rasp of air reminded him of another winter, another storm, and another bear, one he had wounded with his own hands. His gaze drifted to the hillside beyond the cabin window, where the world lay buried under snow, and memories buried under guilt surfaced like old wounds. Years ago, before age had slowed him, he had tracked a she-bear through the same taiga. He had followed her prints through drifting snow, heart pounding with the promise of the hunt. He remembered the sudden flash of white fur among the firs, the surge of adrenaline as he raised his rifle. And then, the shot. A spray of fur and blood. He had watched her stagger and disappear into the blizzard, convinced he had ended her life. But the snowstorm had swallowed her tracks, and he never found the body. The forest held its secrets. For days he scoured the woods, guilt gnawing at him, but the trail was gone. He had convinced himself the bear had limped away to die somewhere deep in the white wilderness, and he felt relief. Relief and relief twisted together. Now, as he knelt over the cub, he saw those same eyes, only the cub's were dulled by injury and cold. He pressed a warm cloth to its side and whispered, "I shot into those eyes," his voice cracked. And now she looked at me with the same eyes, not with fury. With trust. He felt tears freeze on his cheeks. The bear at the door had shown no anger. Instead, she had laid her wounded child at his threshold. She had risked everything, driven by a love he had once torn apart. In his bones, he understood her forgiveness. A mother's love knew no bounds, not even the boundaries between predator and prey, sorry and harm. The cub's breathing grew shallower still. Panic squeezed his chest. He wrapped it in another layer of blankets, murmuring, "Hang on, little one." He thought of the rifle slung by the door, its barrel pointed at where the bear waited. He shuddered, imagining raising it again, but he could not. Not now. Not ever. Through the window, he saw the bear's silhouette against the storm. She had not left. Night deepened, and still she waited, as if maintaining a vigil. The hunter stroked the cub's head and felt a fellowship bloom, a bond no bullet could sever. He paced the cabin floor, memories colliding with the present. He remembered the pride he once felt, tracking, stalking, killing. Now that pride tasted bitter. He had believed the taiga belonged to him, that he was its master. But here, in the glow of the dying embers, he realized he was but a guest. The true masters were the creatures whose lives he had thoughtlessly taken. His breath caught when he heard the cub snuffle. A weak movement. He leaned closer, heart leaping. The cub blinked, a flicker of life in its dark eyes. He let out a choked laugh, a mix of relief and sorrow. The storm's roar faded to a distant murmur. Everything else, time, cold, fear, fell away. He looked at the door, at the bear waiting without complaint. A silent plea hung in the frosty air. She brought him to me because she knew I would help, he thought again, his heart pounding with gratitude and remorse. The weight of his past actions pressed on him like the heaviest snowdrifts. He retrieved a small box of matches and relit the lamp. The golden glow chased back the shadows. He arranged fresh water in a bowl and placed it near the cub. He found scraps of dried meat in his pantry and laid them within reach, hoping the cub's hunger would return. Outside, the bear shifted, low rumble vibrating through the door. He shivered, though the cabin was growing warm. He felt a shudder of anticipation. What would happen when she saw her child stirred? Would she trust him enough to come closer? Or would she retreat with regal sorrow, forever bearing the scars of his past violence? Hours passed. The cub's breaths evened. He dozed in his chair, waking at every shift in the wind. The lamp sputtered. The bear remained steadfast. At one point, he woke to find the cub's head raised, eyes half open. He reached out, but the cub sank back. He pressed his palm to its forehead, warm. Night slipped toward dawn. He thought he heard a snuffle at the door and sat bolt upright. But there was only silence and the wind. He exhaled, tension seeping out of him like steam from a kettle. He closed his eyes, listening to the cub's breathing. He thought she would leave in the night. But she stayed. For 2 days, the storm raged without mercy. Snow piled against the log walls, muffling even the thunder of the wind. Inside the cabin, the old hunter scarcely left the cub's side. The little bear lay curled on a makeshift bed of blankets before the hearth, its breaths shallow and uneven. Every so often, it would stir, an eyelid fluttering, a whimper escaping its muzzle, before slipping back into stillness. He moved quietly, as if his own creaking joints might startle it into stillness forever. At dawn on the second day, he warmed milk by the fire, then coaxed the cub to drink from a chipped glass bottle. The cub's tongue flicked at the rim, taking the milk in small, desperate sips. After each swallow, it shivered, and the hunter felt his heart tighten with both hope and dread. He wrapped it in layers of blanket, pressing close to share warmth, whispering in tones meant more for himself, "Stay with me, little one." All the while, the bear mother remained at the door. She never ventured inside, she did not growl or pace. She simply stood there, her great head lowered, watching through the glass pane. Sometimes the hunter would glance up, their eyes would meet. Her gaze was solemn, sorrowful, but unwavering. It held a quiet strength, a tether that bound him to her unspoken trust. He thought he saw words in her stare: protect her. Heal her. He felt the weight of that command more keenly than any shout. Each time he caught her silhouette against the swirling white, he felt relief wash over him, tempered by fear. Would she bolt at a sudden noise? Would she turn on him if her cub did not recover? He could not risk it, but neither could he refuse her plea. That evening, when the wind lulled to a hollow moan, he wrapped himself in furs and stepped onto the porch to clear a path through the drifts. The bear watched, her black eyes steady in the dim light. He sank to his knees, heart pounding, and carved a narrow corridor toward the woodpile. When at last he rose, he found her only steps away, closer than before. His breath caught at the sight. She had edged forward, as though the effort of the storm was too much for her to bear. He froze. The wind died entirely for a heartbeat. Then she lowered her massive paw, pressing it against the snow. When she lifted it again, she had left a clear print, an imprint of raw power and fragile hope. The hunter's lungs clenched. He saw something in that paw print, something more than mere track in the snow. It was a message. She had licked her paw first, moistening the fur, so that when she pressed it into the soft snow, droplets of ice and fur settled like a seal. In that moment, he felt her sending him something wordless, a plea, a promise, a prayer. He crouched, brushing his gloved finger over the imprint, feeling its cold ridges. She is speaking to me, he thought, voice hushed in his own head. Through this trace, she asks me to save her child. Snowflakes drifted down around them. He looked up to meet her gaze again. Her breath steamed in the cold air, her great flanks rising and falling. The lines of worry around her eyes spoke of nights spent pacing, of dangers faced. Yet she trusted him to understand, to act. He returned her silent message with a steady nod and stepped off the porch. With deliberate care, he scooped up fresh snow and carried it inside to water the cub. Each movement he made felt consecrated by her trust. Back at the hearth, he melted the snow, warming it gently before easing it to the cub's lips. The cub drank, eyelids fluttering, and the hunter pressed a hand over his heart as tears stung at his eyes. Inside, the cabin was a cocoon of warmth against the raging storm. He noticed for the first time how the bear's silhouette cut a dark, protective shape at the doorway, as if she were guarding both the cub and him. An odd tenderness bloomed inside his chest. He thought of all the winters he had spent alone, of the cold that cut deeper than any wound. Now, for the first time, he felt encompassed by a different kind of cold, one born of uncertainty and trust. Late that night, after tending the cub one last time, he sat by the door and spoke to the bear through the glass. "I will not fail you," he whispered. "Your child will not die." He heard only the rush of the wind, but he believed she heard him. When he looked again, her shoulder dipped in a slow, solemn nod, an affirmation that transcended words. As he closed the log door for the night, the bear did not fade into the storm. She remained, her form etched against the white, a guardian in the blizzard. He pressed his hand to the wood where her paw had left its mark, imprint still clear. "She has passed her faith to me," he thought, voice heavy with awe. "And I will honor it." In the flicker of lamplight, he realized that true connection, between hunter and hunted, between man and nature, could be forged only in such moments of shared vulnerability. And as he settled onto his bedroll, the echo of her pawprint in his mind, he knew the storm had brought more than hardship. It had brought a bond as unexpected and enduring as the taiga itself. When the cub's eyelids fluttered open at dawn, the old hunter felt his heart stop, then shatter into pieces of relief. The little bear blinked up at the hearth's glow, whiskers twitching as it tested its breath. A tremor ran through its tiny body, and then, gathering strength, it pushed itself forward on ginger paws, crawling toward the warmth. Its progress was wobbly, each movement a small victory against the frost that still clung to its fur. The hunter knelt beside it, voice choked with wonder. "You're alive," he murmured, pressing a hand to its back in awe. He felt tears sting at his cheeks, tears for the cub's suffering, tears for the mother who waited patiently beyond the door, and tears for the humbling gift of this second chance. His old bones ached, but he rose on unsteady legs, guiding the cub to a shallow bowl of melted snow and warmed milk. It lapped at the liquid with surprising vigor, then curled against the blankets, sated at last. He paced the cabin floor, the weight of the night's work pressing on him like a snowdrift. The storm had eased, pale light filtered through the frosted windows. "That's it," he told himself, voice firm with forced certainty. "I've done what I can. In the morning, she'll take her cub and they'll leave." He imagined them vanishing into the glittering white, a mother and child reunited, leaving him once more in solitude. It pained him to think of letting go, but he believed it was right. By midday, the cub was stronger, exploring the edges of the hearth, sniffing at the hunter's boot. Its little snorts made him smile, a sound he thought he would never hear again. When the cub attempted its first unsteady steps, he gently lifted it, murmuring encouragement. It tottered, swayed, and then, miraculously, found its balance. The hunter's pride swelled, he almost laughed aloud. When twilight approached, he gathered the cub and carried it to the door. He set it down in the snow, soft flakes drifting onto its dark fur. The mother bear was there, her form outlined by the silver light. He stepped back, heart pounding, certain she would scoop up her child and depart. Instead, she sat back on her haunches and watched, head tilted. The hunter's chest tightened. He felt an urgent rush of disappointment. Had he misread her trust? Had the cub's life been for naught? She did not move to retrieve her cub. She merely lay down beside it, her great bulk settling gently into the snow. The cub looked up at her, then at the cabin, confusion in its eyes. The hunter realized then that the bond between them transcended simple reunion. She did not simply want her cub back, she wanted to stay. To remain close. And in that silent refusal to leave, she asked him for something more. He swallowed, voice barely a whisper. All this, and you still stay. He felt a surge of gratitude and fear, gratitude for the depth of her trust, fear at the magnitude of what she asked him to bear. For he understood now that her need was not just for survival, but for connection, between mother and child, between creature and man. The cub hesitated, then in the soft glow of dusk, it pulled itself forward on unsteady legs. It reached the mother and nestled against her flank. The hunter watched as she nuzzled the cub gently, her muzzle brushing its fur. A quiet harmony settled over them, the storm's howl replaced by a deeper, wordless chorus of life renewed. He closed the door slowly, leaning his forehead against the cold wood. He could scarcely trust his senses. The storm had brought him this gift, only to bind him to its wild inhabitants in a new, unexpected way. He felt a tremor of wonder, the mother and cub would not simply vanish at dawn. They would remain, sharing his home, weaving their fate into his. He leaned against the wall inside, drawing deep breaths. The cub's soft snores drifted from the porch, the mother's silhouette stood guard beyond the glass. He thought of his old life, of rifles and traps, of blood and solitude, and knew that nothing could ever be the same. He sank to his knees and pressed a hand to his heart. The warmth of the fire spread through him, but it was nothing compared to the blaze that had ignited in his soul. He whispered, I thought this was the end, but nature had another surprise in store. When dawn's pale light crept through the frost-laced windows, the old hunter felt an unaccustomed tremor in his bones. He dressed in silence, each movement deliberate, as though afraid to break the fragile peace that had settled over his cabin. The storm had passed, the world lay washed in crisp quiet. He stepped onto the porch, breath rising in gentle clouds, heart still uncertain of what he might find. There she stood, the great she-bear, sturdy as ancient stone. Her cub nestled at her side, whiskers twitching in the cold air. As he met her gaze, she took a single, measured step forward. The hunter froze, rifle still leaned against the log wall behind him, unable to gauge the boundary between courage and fear. She drew nearer, slow and solemn, until the tip of her muzzle brushed his forehead. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through his skull that outmatched any shot he had ever fired. He turned to stone. In her dark eyes burned no revenge, no anger for past wrongs, only a gentle reckoning, as though she offered forgiveness in that simple caress. He stood, unblinking, while her breath warmed his brow. Time thinned and collapsed, the memories of cold hunts and wounded creatures, the loneliness of long winters, they all converged in that moment. And then, as tenderly as she had come, she withdrew, nudging her cub before her. The cub, its fur still patchy with frost and scar, rose to its trembling legs. It dipped its head in a hesitant bow, then fell in line behind its mother. Together, they turned and padded away from the cabin, paws pressing new patterns into the fresh snow. The hunter watched until their dark forms melded with the forest's edge, until the tall pines swallowed them whole. He closed the door with a slow click and leaned against the wood, chest tight with a sorrow he hadn't anticipated. He whispered, voice choked with wonder, "It's over." He stepped back inside and surveyed the empty porch, the blankets he'd laid out, the bowls of water and milk now half frozen, the faint scent of fur lingering in the air. He realized he had no words left, only the echo of that gentle forgiveness, imprinted on his skin like a blessing. Days slipped by, each one stretching longer than the last. The hunter tended to his usual chores, splitting logs, stoking the fire, mending traps he no longer meant to use. Yet every task felt hollow, as if performed on the husk of a life once full of purpose. He found himself pausing at the door, expecting to see her there. He would summon the memory of her gaze, her muzzle against his brow, and feel his heart seize with equal parts comfort and ache. By the end of the week, the silence pressed in around him. He could taste it in his morning tea and hear it in the restless whistle of the wind through the chimney. The cabin, once alive with an impossible bond, felt unbearably still. His dreams were haunted by pawprints in fresh snow, by the cub's soft whimpers, by the sound of that faithful touch. He realized that the story was far from over, for him, at least. The bond the bear had forged in desperate need had transformed into something that even time could not dissolve. He sensed her presence in every shadow beyond the windows, in every echoing footstep on the porch boards. The forest no longer seemed a backdrop to his solitary existence, it was a living tapestry woven with threads of memory and tenderness. He sank into his favorite chair by the hearth, the fire crackling in soft protest at the emptiness. He closed his eyes and felt the warmth on his forehead, as though her muzzle rested there still. A single tear slid down his weathered cheek, freezing before it could reach his collar. He had survived countless storms and faced death in its myriad forms, yet this absence felt more penetrating than any blade. He pressed a hand to his heart, where the echo of her forgiveness still reverberated. "I thought it was over," he murmured, voice thick with longing. "But I was wrong." Outside, the forest whispered its secrets, indifferent to his grief. Yet he knew she watched him still, from some hidden clearing, from behind a stand of birches, her presence woven into the very fabric of the wilderness. And though she had taken her cub back into the untamed world, the gift she had left him endured, the knowledge that mercy and wonder flourish even in the coldest places. He rose, determined to honor that gift. He gathered fresh blankets, stacked them on the porch, and placed bowls of water by the door. He did not know whether she would return, but he knew he would wait, as she had waited for him. For the bond they had forged was more than circumstance, it was a promise etched in frost and fur, unbroken by distance or time. A week had passed since the mother and her cub disappeared into the forest. The hunter's cabin felt emptier than ever, each morning silence pressed upon him like freshly fallen snow. He rose before dawn, moved through his chores with mechanical precision, and spent his evenings by the hearth, imagining distant footprints in the drifts. He had restacked the firewood, cleaned the rifle he no longer intended to fire, and left out extra blankets and water on the porch, gestures of a bond that refused to fade. On the 8th morning, the wind was calm and the sky a pale wash of blue. He stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, hoping for a familiar silhouette against the white. The snow lay undisturbed, save for one set of tracks, big, round pawprints leading straight to the cabin door, and no other. His heart skipped, then thundered. He followed the trail, breath catching, until he stood face to face with the she-bear, alone as ice. She was thinner now, winter had taken its toll, but her eyes still shone with that ancient intelligence. She stood motionless, ears tilted forward, as though waiting. He set his mug down and approached slowly, mind racing with questions. Where was her cub? Had he survived? Guilt and relief warred in his chest. He had feared this moment, what if she blamed him? What if her faith in him had been misplaced? She lowered her head, nose twitching with the scent of his cabin. Then, as he watched in breathless silence, she reached into the snow beside her and dragged forward something dark and heavy. The hunter knelt to get a better look. It was the tanned hide of a moose, still warm where she had laid it. He pressed a hand to his mouth, stunned. How had she hunted so large a creature alone? How had she brought this tribute across miles of ice and timber? He rose slowly, studying her bowed head. The moose hide was folded neatly, its soft underfur catching the morning light. He did not know how she had procured it, whether through cunning or desperation, but he understood its meaning instantly. It was a gift. A gesture of profound gratitude from a mother who had once been his prey. A mother who had trusted him to heal her child and to honor that trust. He knelt and laid a free corner of the hide onto the porch boards, feeling its surprising warmth. The smell of fur and musk filled his nostrils, a reminder that the wild still pulsed at his doorstep. He looked up at her, voice thick. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words felt inadequate. He had no idea how to accept such generosity, yet he knew he must. The bear watched him with solemn eyes. For a moment, time held its breath. Then, with a small grunt, she turned away. He felt the weight of her gift settle in his bones, the knowledge that mercy, once given, could reshape the divide between man and nature. He followed her gaze as she padded across the snow, leaving only her single line of tracks in her wake. He watched until she disappeared among the trees, the moose hide left behind like a silent oath. The snow closed over her tracks almost immediately, erasing the path she had taken. He stood alone on the porch, the thick hide draped over his arm, and felt an ache for the cub he had helped save. But more than that, he felt the profound honor of being chosen by a creature he had once sought to kill. Inside, he hung the hide from a sturdy beam, its weight a constant reminder of that impossible bond. Every night, he would gaze at it, feeling the echo of her gift resonate against the smooth walls of his cabin. In the mornings, he would set out fresh water and blankets, even though she never returned. He left the door ajar sometimes, as though inviting her back, trusting that if she wished, she could walk through again. But she never did. And yet he did not feel abandoned. The return of the bear and her silent offering had sealed something sacred between them, an unspoken promise that transcended distance and time. He understood now that the story did not end when she walked away, it continued in every act of kindness he showed to the land and its creatures. He closed his eyes and let the memory of her bowed head and the weight of that moose hide fill his heart. He had been hunter and healer, predator and protector. And in her final gift, he had been granted the rarest of honors, to stand not above the wild, but among it, forever changed by the trust of a mother bear. He no longer reached for his rifle at dawn. The weight of it slung across his back had felt natural all his life, a constant companion through snow and silence. But after the bear's gift of the moose hide, the old hunter stepped outside each morning unarmed, as though shedding an old skin. He placed his hands on the door frame, inhaled the crisp air, and felt a tremor of something unfamiliar, liberation. In the cabin, the rifle remained propped against the wall, untouched. He ran his fingers over its polished wood one last time, then set it aside. It felt wrong now to raise a weapon at any creature that crossed his path. He had once prided himself on his skill, on the trophies that lined the walls. Now those same walls echoed with memories of fur, fear, and forgiveness. He could no longer look at the rifle without seeing in its barrel the eyes of that she-bear forgiving him with a gentle touch. He spent his days in a new ritual. Before the sun climbed the sky, he laden a small sled with scraps of meat, nuts, and dried berries. He trudged into the forest along a familiar path, the sled's runners whispering over the frozen earth. At a clearing where tracks converged, deer, fox, hare, he set out morsels of food, arranging them in neat piles on flat stones. He did this not for sport but as an offering. Each piece laid was a word of apology, a sign of respect for lives he had once thought expendable. He watched from the tree lean, heart pounding whenever a flick of movement caught his eye. A fox crept in first, sniffed a handful of meat, then darted away into the pines. Later, a family of hares hesitantly approached the berries, their noses quivering. He smiled to see them feast, their bright eyes reflecting trust. When a lone stag paused to pick at the scattered nuts, he held his breath in wonder. No rifle cracked the silence, only the soft crackle of frost underfoot and the gentle rustle of fur against snow. Back in the cabin, he rewrote his own story. The nights he once spent polishing shells and mapping hunting grounds were now given to carving small wooden tokens, leaf shapes and bare heads, each one a silent blessing he left near the food piles. He felt a stirring of guilt whenever he thought of the animals he had killed, a sorrow that settled deep in his bones. But beneath that guilt grew something new, a quiet healing. With each day's offering, he sensed a weight lifting from his heart, replaced by a fragile peace. He sat by the hearth each evening, the fire's glow soft on his weathered face. He whispered to the empty room, "If even a beast can forgive, who am I not to change?" The words tasted of hope and humility. He no longer saw the taiga as a quarry to be conquered but as a community he'd wounded and now sought to mend. The trees seemed to lean closer, the wind to carry his contrition into every glade. Sometimes, he thought he saw her, her dark shape among the pines, pausing at the edge of the clearing to examine his offerings. He dared not move, fearing to break the fragile truce. She would vanish into the woods, leaving only fresh prints in the snow. He traced them with his boot, feeling a surge of gratitude. Her forgiveness had taught him that mercy was stronger than any bullet. By midwinter, the hunter's neighbors, rare souls who crossed the blizzard to barter furs, noticed the change. They asked why his walls were empty of trophies or why he carried no rifle. He answered simply, "I learned that life is worth more than any kill." Some shook their heads, others nodded, eyes reflecting a spark of curiosity or envy. But he no longer cared for judgments. He had chosen his own path. In his dreams, he walked beside the she-bear and her cub, their massive forms moving through sunlit clearings instead of storm-blinded forests. They paused when he stopped, as though inviting him to share their world. He felt no fear, only a deep belonging. When he woke, the dream's warmth lingered in his chest. One morning, he found footprints at his doorstep, 2 small prints, then 2 larger ones. He opened the door and breathed in the forest's hush. There was no gift today, only the echo of trust. He nodded once, a silent vow passing between him and the unseen visitors. He would continue his offerings, his silent apologies, his acts of healing. He gathered his sled and set out again, the taiga unfurling before him like a fresh page. Each step was a promise, to protect rather than to hunt, to honor rather than to harm. And though he could not see them, he carried within him the memory of her forgiveness, an unspoken bond that would guide him through every snowdrift and sunlit glade ahead. He pushed open the door to his cabin on a clear spring morning, expecting the usual stillness of dawn. Instead, he froze where he stood. There, on the frosted wooden porch, stood a young bear cub, alone, save for the pale light of dawn glinting on his coat. The cub's fur was lush with late winter thickness, and on one paw was the unmistakable white patch he had seen before, the same mark that had told him this was the child he had saved so many months ago. The hunter's heart thundered in his chest. He closed the door quietly behind him, stepping onto the porch with slow, reverent steps. His breath came in shallow clouds, and for a moment he feared the cub would bolt at the sight of him. But the cub held his ground. His dark eyes met the hunter's, unblinking and calm. He did not shy away. He did not whimper. He simply stood, his small muzzle lifted, studying the man who had changed his life. The hunter's chest tightened as memories flooded back, the storm, the mother's eyes, the desperate weight of the cub in his arms, the long nights by the hearth. He saw every wordless exchange, every trembling breath, every moment of trust given and honored. And now, here was the cub again, returning alone, no mother at his side, to this threshold. He knelt slowly, mind racing with questions he could never voice. The cub took a hesitant step forward, his white patched paw imprinting the wood where once the mother bear had left her message in snow. The hunter held his breath, feeling each second stretch into an eternity. The cub's small eyes reflected a quiet intelligence, an understanding forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. The hunter felt tears sting his eyes, not of sorrow, but of a profound wonder. He wondered what the cub thought. Was this a farewell? A gesture of thanks? A final gift, given by nature to a man who had learned to honor life rather than take it? The cub shifted his weight, then turned. He paused at the edge of the porch, looking back one last time. The hunter rose to his feet, heart pounding so fiercely he feared the cub might hear its echo. He watched as the cub padded down the steps and headed toward the trees, each step measured and unhurried. The hunter did not move to stop him. He felt that this was a moment that required no words, no reach, no call. It was a leaving as natural as spring itself. When the cub slipped among the birches and vanished from sight, the hunter remained rooted, unable to breathe until the empty air filled his lungs. Then, as though waking from a dream, he swallowed hard and whispered to the still morning, "I stood like a statue. My heart raced. I knew, he came to say goodbye. Or to say thank you. I don't know. But I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it all myself." He closed his eyes, letting the final warmth of that encounter settle in his bones. The world was suddenly too bright, too vast, but suffused with a new clarity. The wilderness was neither wild nor tame, but a shared home of endless mysteries and profound connections. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here they tell the truth about nature we so often underestimate. If your heart is now full of awe, type, "Nature is wiser than us." If you, too, believe in a special bond with animals, type, "We are not alone in this world." When he stepped through the gate to check on the dogs barking, his vision blurred, because at the threshold stood a tiger. And it stared at him as if it had been waiting. It was late, well past midnight, when the dogs' frantic howls cut through the stillness of the night. Their cries were neither wolfish nor playful, they sounded terrified. He grabbed his old hunting rifle, more for comfort than use, and crept toward the fence. The moon was a pale sliver, and the air felt heavy, as though nature itself held its breath. He froze when he reached the gate. There, in the dim light, loomed an immense tiger. Its fur gleamed briefly with silver streaks, and its broad shoulders made the fence seem fragile. It did not snarl. It did not snatch at the bars. It simply stood, rigid and silent, eyes locked on his. Heart pounding, he raised his rifle, finger tensed on the trigger. Yet his arm trembled so badly he doubted he could fire. Still, every instinct screamed to defend his home. The tiger, however, remained unnervingly calm. Its tail flicked once, then stilled. It did not retreat. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the dogs and now by his standoff. A woman in a pink bathrobe gasped, a man with a lantern stood at the corner of the path. They shone their lights on the tiger, but the beast paid them no heed. The villagers' faces were ghostly in the lamplight, white, terrified, awed. Not a single shot rang out. No demon leap of violence shattered the night. The tiger was no threat. And yet, the crowd dared not approach. None moved. He felt the collective pulse of fear. But he felt something else, too, the uncanny sense that this creature waited for something beyond themselves. He looked at me as if waiting for me to understand, he would later say, voice trembling even now at the memory. He inched closer, rifle half-raised, heart hammering. The tiger tilted its head, amber eyes reflecting the lantern glow. For a moment, man and beast were equals, caught in a silent communion. Every hair on his neck stood on end. He swallowed, saliva dried in his mouth. Perhaps it was the echo of an ancient memory, something primal whispering across the ages, that kept him from fleeing. Something told him this was not an attack. This was an invitation. A sudden bark jolted him. One of the dogs, cowering behind the man, yipped. He glanced down, and when he looked back, the tiger had taken a deliberate step. It pivoted toward the narrow track leading into the forest. He exhaled, almost without thinking, and lowered the rifle. Thought he'd turn and vanish back into the woods, but the tiger moved forward, toward the trees. Then he paused. Turned his head. Waited. The false ending replayed in his mind. This was surely the moment it would flee, vanish into the darkness as if it had never been. Yet it did not. It held its ground for a heartbeat longer, then moved again, ever so slowly, into the black mouth of the woods, glancing back once as if beckoning him to follow. The neighbors watched, silent and motionless, their breaths shallow. No one dared speak. No one dared move. In that suspended moment, the line between fear and wonder blurred. He stood at the threshold of the unknown, rifle still in hand, torn between instinct and something ineffable. Behind him, the gate creaked as it swung closed with the breeze. He dared not look away. His heart thundered in his ears. The tiger's shape disappeared among the ancient trunks, but its presence lingered like a promise, or a warning. He lowered the rifle completely and met the neighbors' eyes. They all saw the same thing, something impossible had just unfolded. They felt the hush of life waiting to resume normal rhythm, yet knowing it never would. He gulped, throat tight. "You saw it?" the man with the lantern whispered. He nodded, unable to speak at first. Then the words tumbled out, sharp and amazed. It was waiting for me. It wasn't going after us. It wanted us to follow." Silence swallowed his words. He looked back at the darkness where the tiger had gone. No roar, no snap of jaws, only the soft rustle of leaves. The forest seemed to exhale. Some instinct pulled at him, a call deeper than fear or curiosity. He wanted to chase after that improbable guide. But he stood frozen, torn between the safety of the village and the uncharted wild beyond. The others trembled beside him, drawn by the same unspoken force. Then, as if granting them a final glimpse of its grace, the tiger's silhouette reappeared between two trees. It paused in the silver glow, muscles rippling, then turned and vanished for good. The forest swallowed it whole. He had expected it to run away, expecting the nightmare to end. Instead, it left an echo in his soul, a question he could not answer: why had it come, and why had it waited for him? And so he remained at the gate, rifle lowered, heart racing, staring into the night. The dogs were silent now. The village held its breath. Because something had changed forever under the moonlit sky. He could not yet know what that change would bring, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would never look at the wilderness the same way again. He stood at the edge of the village path, the rifle forgotten in his hand, while the others hesitated behind him. The tiger did not move away. Its massive head was lifted, ears pricked, as though listening to some silent command. Heartbeats thundered in the hush that fell over the small crowd. Fear held them frozen, but something deeper urged them forward. A woman in a faded floral dress emerged from the cluster, tears streaking her face. Her voice shook as she explained that her grandson had vanished that morning, last seen chasing a stray goat toward the forest's edge. At her words, a collective understanding rippled through the group: this was no random tiger sighting. It was a summons. He swallowed hard, exchanging a glance with the lantern-bearer. The light trembled in the man's hand, casting the tiger's shadow larger than life on the trunks behind. We go after it," he murmured. No one answered, the answer was written in every beating heart. Slowly, they fell in line behind the beast. Silently, the tiger turned its broad shoulders and slipped onto the narrow trail leading into the pines. Every so often it paused, looking back over its shoulder, those deep amber eyes flicking from one terrified face to the next. It was not hurting them away, it was guiding them, checking that they followed. With each glance, it reassured and warned all at once. He felt the muscles in his legs tremble when he took the first step. The underbrush crackled beneath boots and paws, and the scent of damp earth filled his nostrils. His mind raced, a wild tiger leading a band of humans. Impossible. Yet there it walked, calm and precise. Every rustle of leaves made the villagers flinch, only to glance at the tiger and see it unafraid. Their emotions roiled like a storm. One moment, terror surged as a distant twig snapped, the next, awe flooded them when the tiger's confident stride never faltered. Hope fluttered like a timid bird in his chest, perhaps this creature truly knew the forest better than any rescuer could. Perhaps it would lead them to the boy. He wasn't driving us away, he was showing us the way, the man would recall later, voice hushed as if reverent. The path wound deeper under towering firs. Moonlight pooled in swaths, illuminating curious moths that danced around the tiger's muzzle. At times, he thought he saw the beast pause to sniff the air or press a giant paw against a rock, as if marking the correct route. Each gesture felt deliberate, as if the tiger were a seasoned guide. Behind him, the woman clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. The children huddled close, their small fingers gripping their parents' sleeves. An old farmer trailed last, clutching a lantern with knuckles white, but he, too, felt the current of conviction in the air. No one dared speak, no one dared break the spell. They walked for what felt like an eternity. Anxiety gnawed at their resolve. Would the tiger suddenly turn savage? Would they ever see the boy again? Yet every time dread threatened to overtake them, the tiger halted just long enough to ensure their footsteps matched its own. They drew courage from that silent acknowledgement. Suddenly, after a series of low murmurs of gratitude passed among them, the tiger paused beneath a moss-covered boulder. It scratched the ground once and looked back. The entire procession slowed to a halt. For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. They thought the journey ended there. Moonbeams glinted in the tiger's eyes, and in that glint lay the promise of completion. The path ahead was obscured, and the villagers dared to hope the child lay just beyond this point. Relief began to warm their chests. But then the tiger lifted its paw, paused mid-air, and never set it down. It turned its head slightly, nudged the boulder with its massive shoulder, and then resumed walking, deeper, into the whispering pines. We thought he was simply leaving the village, but after a few more minutes he stopped. In that moment, fear and wonder clashed again. The false ending dissolved, replaced by a new, more urgent question: where, in this endless green expanse, would the tiger lead them next? The clearing opened like a secret, sunk low between ancient mounds and choked with tall, reedy grass. Moonlight filtered in pale ribbons, revealing nothing but a sea of waving stalks. The villagers halted at the edge of the marshy dip, hearts hammering. Not a trace of the missing child. No footprints, no cries, nothing but the skitter of insects in the undergrowth. The tiger stepped forward, nose lowered. It sniffed the air, then lifted its head and fixed its gaze on a tight cluster of reeds. A low, rumbling growl vibrated in its chest, short, urgent. The villagers froze. What could it be sensing that was invisible to human eyes? "He's here," whispered the woman with the lantern, voice cracking. They edged forward. The tiger remained calm but insistent, pressing its massive head toward the reeds as if drawing an arrow on the path. It circled the patch, ears flicking, then barked, an almost curious, welcoming sound that made the hair on their neck stand on end. "Listen," someone said. At first all they heard was the breeze in the grass. But then, faint and trembling, came a soft, desperate squeak. A child's cry, little more than a breath, carried on the night air. They parted the reeds as one, hearts in their throats, and there he lay. The boy was curled on his side, drenched in dew and tears, shivering beneath the towering grass. His small arms were drawn in close, mud clung to his cheeks. He had fallen in the morning, spun around by panic in the woods, and lay lost until now. A cry broke from his mother's lips as she tore through the reeds. She dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping him in her arms. The child clung to her, trembling, but breathing. Alive. The tiger watched, every muscle still. It stepped back a pace and settled on its haunches, motionless, silent. Not a muscle twitched except the slow rise and fall of its broad back. Its eyes, copper-bright in the lantern glow, shone with an almost human intensity. He stood beside us as we carried the child, the man would later recall, without a sound. Without movement. Only his eyes, like a man's. Gently, the villagers lifted the boy, one supporting his shoulders, another cradling his legs. His mother's sobs shook her frame as she followed, tears mingling with the dew on his hair. The tiger rose and fell in step behind them, acting as guardian rather than predator. They moved slowly back toward the path. The boy stirred, pressed into his mother's arms, and nestled his face into her shoulder. The villagers dared to breathe more freely. Relief swelled in their chests, this was the end of their nightmare. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, the tiger paused. It turned its head and looked back at them, gaze fixed and unblinking. There was no snarl, no flick of its tail, only that steady, unwavering stare. It did not vanish into the reeds or pick up its own trail. Instead, it lingered, as though waiting for something more. "We thought that was it, that he'd save the child and then leave," the lantern-bearer would say later, voice hushed. But he did not leave. They halted again, terror and gratitude entwined in their hearts. The tiger's silhouette stood between the dark marsh and the deeper black of the forest, a sentry at the gates of a world they barely understood. The boy's mother pressed him closer, and the others clustered behind, casting uneasy glances at the majestic beast. Together, they had found the lost child. But the tiger remained, unmoved, inscrutable, and impossibly present, like a guardian spirit refusing to abandon them until the last tremor of doubt had passed from their souls. He emerged from the reeds last, moving with surprising delicacy for such a colossal creature. The tiger tracked the small procession through the marsh's uneven ground, padding just behind the villagers yet never closing the gap. It was their silent sentinel, shoulders rippling under striped fur, tail brushing reeds but never snagging them. Not once did it break its steady pace or glance back in aggression, only watchfulness. The lantern's glow bobbed along the narrow track as the villagers carried the limp child, careful with each step. Fear hummed beneath their skin, but awe pressed just as fiercely against their chests. Every so often, the tiger would flex a paw, adjusting its position, ensuring the path remained clear and no threat could slip past its sight. It was as if the forest itself had deputized this magnificent beast to escort them safely home. Their breaths came ragged in the cool night air. Some muttered prayers, others held their hands over their mouths, stifling sobs. Yet all eyes flicked to the tiger. It moved with such purpose it felt cruel to question its intent. No wild instinct to kill or to flee. Only the unwavering mission of guardian. At one point, the ground gave way beneath a man's foot. He lurched, nearly dropping the child, but the tiger rounded the corner swiftly and stepped between them. Its flank brushed his leg as a subtle warning, "Remain careful." The man's heart lurched, but when he met the tiger's amber gaze, fear melted into gratitude. He straightened, more mindful of each footfall, eyes never leaving the beast's powerful silhouette. None of us felt threatened, the eldest farmer would later insist, voice hushed as though recalling a dream. Only one thing, we understood nothing about nature. As they reached firm ground, the boy's small body stirred. His mother bent, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. He blinked, confusion in his dark eyes, then whispered, voice brittle, "Who's that, big cat?" They asked him gently what he had seen while lost. The child's lips quivered, and he glanced over his shoulder at the tiger, which paused once more, as though eavesdropping. With a solemn nod, he said, He was my guardian. A giant cat watching over me." Tears pooled in his mother's eyes, and the villagers exchanged glances heavy with wonder. The tiger let out a low, approving rumble that vibrated through the air, and then settled into a calm pace again. No evidence of hunger. No flash of claws. Only soft fur and enormous paws guiding them forward. They reached the edge of the village lane, where lanterns hung from porches and neighbors gathered in cautious circles. The lantern-bearer lifted the child into waiting arms, and everyone exhaled as if releasing a held breath. Relief mingled with disbelief, a cocktail potent enough to make them tremble on their feet. For an instant, they believed the encounter would end here. The tiger would disappear into the tree line like a phantom, and life would resume its familiar rhythm. Women dabbed their eyes, men lowered weapons they had gripped when terror had briefly seized their souls. The night air felt calmer, the dogs silent now, awaiting the child's reunion. But the tiger did not vanish. It remained on the fringe of lamplight, stripes dissolving into shadow. Its gaze swept the small crowd, measuring them. It stood tall, neither beast nor myth, but something vast and inexplicable. A hush fell. The boy, snug against his mother's chest, turned and offered a small wave toward the tiger. In return, the beast dipped its head, a slow, deliberate nod that spoke of ancient understanding and solemn promise. For a fleeting moment, man and tiger acknowledged one another across the gulf between the tame and the wild. They thought it would end with that silent bow. But he stayed, and did one more thing. Dawn broke in soft pinks and golds, spilling over the village rooftops and into the edges of the forest. He watched from his porch as the tiger reappeared at daybreak, steps fluid as mist, and paused at the tree line. The villagers, bleary-eyed from little sleep, gathered behind him, barely daring to breathe. At that moment, the beast seemed to contemplate the human settlement one last time. Then, without haste, it turned and slipped into the emerald gloom, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. For a full day, the tiger did not return. Life in the village felt hollow, dogs no longer panicked at night, but the memory of their guide lingered in every restless shadow. Mothers hushed their children's questions about tigers, eyes downcast. Hunters checked their rifles more out of habit than fear, but none ventured beyond the fields. The forest itself seemed to hold its secrets close, waiting. On the morning after the tiger's departure, a curious commotion gathered at the gate. A group of villagers pushed aside a low hedge to reveal a fresh carcass of a young doe. Its coat still shone with dew, and neither blade nor toothpick had touched its flesh. The deer lay as if placed with intent, no wounds beyond a single clean bite at the throat. Its limbs were neatly folded under it, and a small spray of wildflowers rested atop its flank, as though placed there in reverence. A hush fell. The same villagers who had trembled in terror now stared, mouths agape. The woman whose grandson had been lost pressed trembling fingers to her mouth. The lantern-bearer's knees buckled, and a farmer steadied him with a gentle arm. None spoke. They all knew what it meant. He had returned life, and left the meat, the elder whispered, voice thick with wonder. So we'd not believe it was just chance. Stories unfurled among the crowd, tales told by elders of the Amur woods, legends that great cats sometimes repay a debt, offering sustenance to those they had spared. Some scoffed at superstition, but most felt the shiver of ancient truth. Who else could have delivered such a precise gift but the tiger, still watching from the silent depths? He knelt to examine the deer. No hunter's mark. No villain's spoor. Only the soft, impressed pattern of huge paw prints leading back into the forest, prints that faded into moss and leaf litter. He rose, brushing his hand over his mouth to catch his breath, and looked at the assembled faces. Each held astonishment, gratitude, a deep-seated reverence. They built a humble shrine beside the gate, a circle of stones around the deer, candles and broken woven baskets, the wildflowers left untouched. Women wept quietly, men bowed their heads. A prayer rose for the child's safety and for the tiger's welfare. Children watched with wide eyes, learning a lesson far greater than any schoolmaster could impart. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened, he wandered alone to the edge of the forest. The deer's shrine glowed faintly behind him. He pressed a hand against an ancient pine and closed his eyes, recalling every moment of the tiger's vigil. He pictured those deep copper eyes, the grace in every step, and the solemn nod as he left them at the village lane. He understood then that the forest had sent them an emissary, a being equal parts predator and guardian. Its gift was more than meat, it was a reminder of the bond that joins all living things. As the chill evening air settled around him, he felt an unfamiliar ache of humility and awe. They thought the story was over. Life would return to normal, crops would be planted, the schoolhouse would reopen, the market would bustle again. But in his heart, he knew that nothing, and no one, could ever quite be the same. The tiger had bestowed a miracle, a debt repaid in flesh and petals, and left them with questions that refused to die. He walked back to the shrine, kneeling to place a single orchid from his own garden atop the stones. His fingers trembled as he whispered thanks. The forest answered with a soft rustle. A distant roar, low and sonorous, rolled through the pines, a promise that their stranger had not forgotten them. It seemed the tale had reached its end. But in his mind, it was just beginning. He spent that night awake, staring into the flickering embers of his hearth, wrestling with a storm of questions. How could he explain what had happened? A tiger, his old adversary and neighbor to the wild, had stepped beyond its nature to guide and protect a human child. It defied every lesson he'd ever learned in a lifetime spent among the trees. He rose before dawn and walked the perimeter of his small clearing, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Memories tugged at him, tales passed down from the village elders about hunters saved from freezing blizzards by a ghostly guardian, about lost travelers guided back to safety by a pair of glowing eyes appearing at the edge of their campfire glow. He had always dismissed these accounts as folklore, shards of superstition woven into the fabric of frontier life. But now, he understood that the forest had its own ledger of kindnesses, recorded not in ink but in the deeds of its creatures. Later that morning, he accompanied the boy's grandmother to her humble cottage at the outskirts of the village. The woman was small and bent with age, her hands worn like driftwood, her eyes bright with tears. He found her seated by a simple wooden table, clutching a faded shawl that smelled of lavender and old prayers. When she saw him, she rose unsteadily, then sank again, tears falling freely. He knew, she whispered, her voice breaking like old glass. He knew where the child was. She dabbed her eyes with the sleeve of her shawl. Not because he saw him, but because he felt him. As only a mother, or a spirit can. Her words struck him like a blow. He sank into the chair opposite her, feeling the weight of every lesson he'd ever taught about nature's cruelty and beauty. He remembered teaching children in the village school, the tiger's teeth used for hunting, its roar a warning to respect its domain. All data, all facts, numbers in a ledger, paw prints in the mud. Yet here was the truth, played out beneath the moon and among the reeds. I've spent my life cataloging tracks, studying prey and predator, he confessed softly. But I suddenly realized that all my knowledge of forest beasts was nothing but numbers and facts. The truth lies in their actions. She nodded, her tears catching the morning light. You have seen it with your own eyes. That is the greatest knowledge of all. He left her cottage with the grandmother's words echoing in his mind. Around him, the forest awoke, birds flitting between pines, rabbits peering from brush. To anyone else, it was just another dawn. To him, it was a testament. He thought of the tiger, how it had watched his every step, protected them from harm, and then offered the deer as a gift. Actions that spoke of gratitude, intelligence, even empathy. That afternoon, he gathered the village council beneath the old oak in the center square. Faces turned toward him expectant, relieved, skeptical. He opened his mouth to speak of the boy's rescue, of the gift left at the gate, but no words felt sufficient. He searched their eyes and saw fear mingled with wonder, just as he had felt. Ladies and gentlemen, he began haltingly, we have always respected the forest as fearful and unpredictable. But last night, or rather, the night before last, we witnessed something beyond explanation. A tiger led us, protected a child, and repaid a debt in kindness. I cannot offer you charts or statistics. I can only tell you what I saw. He recounted each moment, the tiger's silent vigil, its steady escort, the doe laid like an offering. At the end, the crowd was quiet. Some faces shone with tears, others hardlined with disbelief. Yet none dismissed his words outright. A heavy hush settled in the square, as if the land itself listened. He expected the story to fade in time, relegated to the realm of village lore. I thought I'd forget with time, he later admitted, voice low in a rare moment of candor, but then a memory surfaced that changed everything. A week passed before the final note fell into place. A solitary visitor arrived at dawn, stepping down the winding path from the forest edge. It was the grandmother's prized shepherd dog, old and faithful, limping toward the shrine by the gate. Around its collar hung a single tuft of tiger fur, orange and black, tied with a strip of bark. The dog dropped the fur at the stones and lay down, head low but eyes bright with devotion. It did not bark, it only watched the village awaken. In its steady gaze, he read a message as clear as the tiger's own amber stare: the story was not done. The bond between man and beast reached deeper than blood or fear, it was woven of gratitude, understanding, and a promise that nature's wonders endure beyond a single night. He stared at that humble offering, lion's share of proof more potent than any map or ledger. And he knew then that he would never stop telling the tale, that every retelling would carry the weight of his own transformation, from skeptic armed with facts to witness awed by the living spirit of the wild. Because sometimes the greatest truths are not learned in textbooks, but in the silent deeds of creatures we thought we knew. A week later, the dogs began their frantic barking once more, sharp yelps echoing through the pre-dawn hush. He woke to the familiar call, heart clenching at the memory of that night, but he forced himself up and slipped outside. The air was cool, damp with the promise of morning mist. In his hand, the old rifle felt heavier than ever, but his resolve was simple: he had to see. At the forest's edge, he stopped short. There, framed between two ancient pines, stood the tiger. The same majestic beast, its coat still gleaming in the pale light. It paused on the threshold of the trees, powerful shoulders squared, and turned its head toward him. In that moment, man and tiger locked eyes across the thin barrier between civilization and wild. He swallowed, his throat thick. Every memory surged back, the way the tiger had guided them, protected the boy, offered its gift of life and sustenance. He felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes, tears not of fear, but of something far deeper, an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. For a long moment, neither moved. The jungle birds held their song, the wind stilled in deference, and the world seemed to pause with them. He could almost hear a voice in the tiger's gaze, a rumbling echo in his bones that said, Asterisk, now you understand. Asterisk. The tiger's tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, then it turned. Its massive form pivoted gracefully, as if it weighed each movement with care. He watched its back recede into the darkness, muscles rippling beneath striped fur. It did not hurry. It did not break stride. It left in that measured walk, a farewell worthy of the silent bond they now shared. He stood rooted where he was, tears slipping unchecked down his cheeks. He felt them fall, heavy and warm, for the loss of something he had never truly owned but had come to cherish more deeply than words could hold. It was the end of an extraordinary chapter, yet in that moment, the beginning of a new life. He closed his eyes and let the tears flow. He did not fear the tiger, he mourned the parting of a guardian who had shown him the heart of the wild. When he opened his eyes again, the forest was empty, no glowing eyes, no rustle of fur, only the quiet breath of dawn and the echo of paws on the forest floor. He turned and walked back along the narrow path to the village. Each step felt like a promise to remember, to honor the lessons learned in moonlight and mud. Neighbors met him at the gate, their faces bright with questions and wonder. He could not speak of everything he felt, how the tiger's final glance had spoken of trust, of wisdom, of an unspoken covenant between their worlds. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the forest. "He's gone," he said softly. "But he left us more than a memory. He left us understanding." They nodded, eyes glistening. Some crossed themselves, others ran fingers along the shrine of stones and wildflowers they had built. All felt the shift in their world, the line between human and nature forever blurred. He wiped his cheeks on his sleeve and took a steadying breath. A new day had begun, not just in the sky but in his heart. He realized he could never live as he had before, chasing trophies, marking territories, believing the wild was only to be conquered or feared. Now he carried something more profound, respect born of shared experience, humility taught by a creature of fang and paw. That evening, as the sun sank and the sky turned amber, he knelt before the shrine once more. He placed a fresh branch of pine among the stones, his fingers shaking with reverence. He whispered a vow he could scarcely believe he was making, to protect the forest, its creatures, and the fragile bridge between their worlds. Above, the pines swayed in a gentle breeze. He half expected to hear the soft padding of paws, the rustle of stripes in the undergrowth. But the tiger was gone. Yet its presence lingered, woven into the air and the beating of his heart. He rose, head held high. Tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving lines of salt and resolve. He would tell the story, in the schoolhouse, at the council, by the hearth, so that no one would doubt the miraculous guardian who had walked among them. He would never live the same way again. And that, he knew with absolute certainty, was the greatest gift the tiger had given him. He stopped laying snares at dawn and gathering pelts at dusk. The rifle that once hung across his shoulders was returned to its rack, unused. Instead, he donned a worn green vest and patrolled the forest paths with quiet reverence. Every morning, he slipped between the silver birches and moss-draped pines, listening for the rustle of deer hooves and the distant echo of bird calls. His mission was no longer to take life, it was to guard it. Villagers soon noticed the change. They spotted him kneeling beside a fallen sapling, uprooting invasive weeds. They saw him guiding lost hikers back to the trailhead, and rescuing cubs tangled in barbed wire. At night, he sat by the flickering lantern light in the schoolhouse, sharing stories with wide-eyed children who hung on every word. One crisp autumn morning, he stood before a circle of first graders, their small faces expectant under bright hats. On the chalkboard behind him he had drawn a simple sketch of a tiger, its stripes bold against white. This, he told them, voice steady but warm, is not just a beast of fear. It is a mind alive with purpose. A little girl raised her hand. "Do you believe the tiger knew where the boy was?" she asked, voice trembling with hope. He paused, brushing a lock of silvering hair from his brow. For years, he had measured everything, tracking, habitats, prey patterns. But those facts now felt hollow without the beating heart of witness. He met the child's gaze and answered quietly, "I do not believe." "I know." A ripple of amazement passed through the room. The children sat straighter, as if they, too, could suddenly perceive the world beyond numbers. He smiled softly and continued, "He saved us. And he showed that animals remember, understand, and forgive. Sometimes, better than we do." Outside, the wind stirred golden leaves across the schoolyard. A hush of wonder settled among the small faces. He watched as one boy clutched his notebook tighter, scribbling furiously. Another child whispered to a friend, pointing toward the dark line of pines beyond the playground. The forest no longer seemed distant, it felt alive with possibility. After class, parents stopped him in the hallway, pressing warm mugs of tea into his hands. They spoke of curiosity sparked in their children, questions once never asked. They thanked him for opening their eyes to the wild heart dwelling just beyond their fences. He returned home late, lantern in hand, and passed the little shrine beneath the oak. The wildflowers had gone to seed, but the circle of stones remained strong. He knelt, touching the cool surface of one smooth rock, and remembered the tiger's final farewell. Every emotion he had felt, the fear, the awe, the vow to change, resurfaced in a single breath. In the months that followed, he organized patrols with the local rangers, teaching them to respect spoor as messages, not trophies. He led guided walks for visitors, pointing out tiny footprints in the soft earth and explaining how a giant cat might pause to listen to the forest's heartbeat. His days once defined by the hunt were now shaped by protection and teaching. Late one evening, as he closed his gate, he heard the dogs bark once more. He paused and looked toward the tree line, but saw only shadow. He exhaled, his breath misting in the cool air, and walked inside without a backward glance. He no longer expected miracles. Yet, he believed in them more deeply than ever. He placed his hand over his heart, feeling its steady thrum. He thought of that night at the gate, of every silent step the tiger had taken behind them, of the doe laid out like an offering. He realized the true miracle was not that a predator had become a guide, but that one man's heart could change so completely. If your heart is racing right now, you know. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. He walked the same gravel path he had taken that night, stepping over the drifting leaves as dawn's first light brushed the treetops. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. His footsteps echoed softly, each crunch a reminder of how long it had been since he'd last stood beneath these ancient branches. Every step tugged at memories, of trembling dogs, of whispered prayers, of a silent guide more majestic than any human soul. At the gate where he had first seen the tiger, he paused. The wooden pickets were the same pale gray, weathered by seasons of rain and sun. He reached out and pressed a finger against the rough surface, tracing the grain that had felt warm under the tiger's gaze. He closed his eyes, recalling the moment his heart had stopped, the breath caught in his chest as those amber eyes met his own. He stepped through the gate and followed the faint hoofprints imprinted in the soft dirt, relics of the doe that had laid its life before the village. The circle of stones still stood at the forest's edge, wildflowers now wilting but petals still clinging stubbornly to their slender stems. He knelt beside them, fingertips brushing the smooth stones as if they held secrets. He whispered a quiet vow of gratitude, to the forest, to the child who had been saved, and to the guardian he could never truly repay. The path narrowed as he moved deeper into the woodland, shafts of light cutting through the canopy in golden beams. Birds awakened, trilling songs that seemed to welcome him home. He inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. Here, beneath the soaring firs, he had learned to see beyond fear and fact to something more profound, the living spirit of nature itself. He paused at the bend where the tiger had first led them, the place where hope had seized his heart. The earth was soft there, moss cushions covering tangled roots. He closed his eyes and listened. For a long moment, there was only his breath and the rustle of leaves. Then, a distant roar rolled across the forest, low and resonant. It was not a roar of hunger or rage, it was a statement of presence, a voice declaring, "I am here." He stood still, chest tightening as the sound reverberated through the trees. His eyes flicked toward the depths of the woods, where shadows pooled beneath giant trunks. The roar came again, closer this time, yet still distant enough to be a whisper on the wind. He felt it not as a threat, but as a greeting, a confirmation that the guardian still watched over these lands. "He's out there," he said softly, voice cracking with awe. "I feel it. Not as a beast. As a brother." Tears glistened in his eyes, tears of remembrance, of wonder, of a bond forged under the pale moonlight and sealed in daylight's first glow. He had lived a lifetime believing the wild was to be feared or conquered. Now he understood it could also offer kinship beyond words. He imagined the tiger stepping through the trees in that same measured pace, stripes rippling like flowing water, eyes aglow with ancient wisdom. He pictured the great cat pausing at the edge of this very glade, nodding in acknowledgement before slipping back into the forest's embrace. He drew a trembling breath and pressed both hands against his chest, feeling his heart beat with gratitude. It throbbed not with fear, but with reverence, for the creature that had guided them, for the mystery that remained, and for the transformation wrought in his own soul. For a moment, he considered calling out, offering thanks into the silent air. But words felt too small. Instead, he simply stood there, head bowed in solemn respect, allowing the roar's echo to wash over him one last time. The forest grew quiet once more. Sunlight filtered down in lazy shafts, illuminating motes of dust that danced like fireflies. He exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle into peace. He turned and began to walk back toward the village, each step steady, each breath filled with a new purpose. At the gate, neighbors greeted him with gentle nods. Their faces carried the same wonder and belief that his own did. Children peered up at him with wide eyes, as if expecting him to speak of miracles. He offered them a soft smile, understanding that some truths were better felt than explained. He pushed the gate open and slipped through, the latch clicking softly behind him. The world beyond the forest awaited, fields to tend, duties to fulfill, stories to share. But he would never again walk these paths as a skeptic armed with facts. Now he carried something far greater, the conviction born of experience, the certainty that wonder exists beyond the edge of fear. He looked back one final time at the dark line of trees against the brightening sky. No glowing eyes watched him. No rustle of striped fur whispered farewell. Yet he felt the tiger's presence more keenly than ever, in the scent of pine, the cry of the birds, the heartbeat in his chest. He raised a hand in silent tribute, then turned and walked away. He did not doubt that the guardian still roamed these woods, vigilant and watchful, a brother spirit in fur and fawn. If someone had told him all this before, that a predator could become a protector, that a man could find kinship in a beast, he would not have believed it. But it happened. And he was there. And he was not alone. If your heart is full of reverence right now, type, "Nature is wiser than us."